This is Stephen Hunt, who I introduced to you briefly.
Hello everybody.
Back. Stephen started gliding in 1962, mid-1962, went on and achieved some pretty interesting aspects of gliding. He then went to powered aircraft and got a full PPL license, then went into aerial towing, and in the meantime he'd knocked off a record and was one of the first person in WA to get a gold certificate in gliding. One of his records still holds good for the class of glider that he was involved in, and it's involved a lot of his life. He's mixed with gliding people for since most of us can remember.
45 years.
45 years. And so to tell us about the early days of gliding and pretty much extracts from his book, he's going to tell you all about the gliding early days in Western Australia. Over to you.
Thanks, Brian. About 3.5 years ago, I got a call from the president of the gliding club, James Cooper, and he said to me, "You know that flight that you did in that single-seat glider?" And I said, "Yeah, well, there was a couple of them." And he said, "You know, they'd never been recorded." I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No." He said, "We didn't have any record book as such at the time." He said, "Can you tell us a bit about it?" So I just rattled off the usual stuff, told him where I'd landed. He said, "We know you got there because we had to go and get you." So it was a flight from Penduly to Geraldton, and they'd lost the barograph traces, they'd lost the turning point photos, and generally the only thing that remained was the fact that I actually arrived. "How you going there, Dennis?" "Good." I sent Dennis solo a long time ago. So it started me thinking, because my trade was publishing. I'd worked with the Sunday Times and different newspapers around the place, and even Rupert Murdoch. And I thought, well, maybe the time has come to put the story of the early days of gliding into print. But I also knew that I was going to need some help. I knew that we had a lot of the history of gliding within the Gliding Club of Western Australia. And so I was talking to my friend Gloria Baird here, and I knew that Gloria had at home documents, photographs from the early history of gliding. And after discussion I said, well, I need someone to give me a hand. And so I was very fortunate that when Gloria and I went along to the Batty Library one day, and I said, "I'm not enjoying this Batty Library thing because I'm looking at negatives and I spent all my life doing that. Would you like to do this?" And Gloria said, "Yeah, I don't mind." So we knew the approximate times that we wanted to look at in newspapers, so we were able to, Gloria was able to narrow it down. So that's the preamble to the story. Okay, so the other thing, that because we knew there were pieces missing in the story, the Bunbury Gliding Club and gliding at Pinjar and things like that, we put a notice in the paper, can we help? I think, Dennis, you replied to that particular ad. Okay, and it was great because we got emails and photos and interviewed a lot of people. And if we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't have had a book. So Gloria was able to go to the Batty Library and search through, I imagine it would be hundreds and hundreds of, in fact she was down there that long they said that she should have got annual leave down there. So yeah, we'll move on to the next section. This was the first photo that Gloria found in the paper. Now, I don't hand out excuses for the quality of the picture because we did try very hard to get the original photos, and I was told by the newspapers that they'd actually lost the original photos. In fact, to the point where the West were buying back photos because in a fire. Okay, so that's 1930. So the story behind this glider is Gil Ford had an interest in aviation, and he was also a speedway rider. And while at the speedway one night, he approached Ted Kinnear, who was also a speedway rider, and said, "I'd like to build a glider." You know, nuts. Anyway, they were both metal workers. Now, at the time, all gliders had been built out of timber. Okay? Timber, or spruce. So he was taking on something. He wasn't a metal worker by any you know, stretch of the imagination. But he also didn't have any plans. So he went to the Popular Mechanics magazine, found a 3/4 view, a photo of a glider, and scaled it up. It had a 40-foot wingspan, and he scaled it down to 35 feet and redrew the whole thing. So he designed his own glider, and he built it out of metal. So, two extraordinary things. Him and Ted Kinnear, between them, built a glider. Now, from what I understand, it's never been done before. That is, at that time, and certainly to our knowledge, a primary glider or anything like that, having the metal frame built out of having it being out of brazed steel. So there we are. So we move on to the next photo here. This photo here was actually taken 12 days later. They covered the glider, and this was at Maylands Aerodrome. At the time, it was the main aerodrome in Perth. And in our book, it's the first double-page spread. We were very fortunate to get this photo. It's a high-quality picture, and they actually used a truck to launch the glider. The person on the left is Ted Kinnear. Now, he was a boilermaker, and he was also the producer of plays and an actor. And he was also responsible for transporting mining parts to New Guinea. Sometimes the parts were too big to get in the door of the aeroplane. So what he did was, he cut the side of the fabric out of the aeroplane, put the mining part in it, put the fabric back, flew the thing to New Guinea, cut the fabric off the aeroplane, took the part out, fabricked it back and flew back to Perth. Okay. Now we get on to Gil Ford. Now Gil Ford is the fellow there with the white shirt and the lousy tie. Okay, now Gil, very intelligent man. He designed and built this glider, and he went on to, this glider, after it was sold to the Kalgoorlie Gliding Club, they actually tied it to a fence. Actually had it on show one night, like in a room like this, and then they took it out to the airfield and they tied the thing to a fence. You little beaut, we've got our glider, the very first ever made. Willy came along during the night, turned it over and smashed it to pieces. This is the Depression years. You can imagine the feeling they had. Like diddle their dough on the spot. But anyway, Gil got his money, and he decided to build another glider straight away. So he built the next one, and he painted it all blue. And the thing about Bluey, as he called it, was it had no ailerons. The wing tilted. And it was such a radical change in aeronautical design that someone came along to him and accused him of stealing the idea from this other person, and only turned into a court case. I don't know what the outcome was, but anyway, there's the true story of Gil. And Bluey actually flew at Caversham for some time. So we move on here to the next one here. Now, about a month after that flight, Harry Baker, sorry, I should have gone back there. I just wanted to do a bit more on this one. The person in the seat there, by the way, is Harry Baker. You've all heard of Harry Baker. So he was, the other thing about this photo was, it was flown on a Thursday. Now when you think about it for a while, after we checked back calendars and worked out what day it was, if you just built a glider in metal and you didn't know how it was going to fly, I don't know whether I'd fly it on a Saturday and Sunday and have everybody watching. I think I'd take it out to a paddock somewhere and say, well, we'll just fly it out of the way so no one can see us. So that's probably why they got Harry Baker to fly it on a Thursday. Okay, and he left it off the ground about 1 metre, and that's all they wanted to know. They checked the aeroplane out and corrected the balance of whatever it was. And here's the thing in flight, and this was the actual first time, careful choice of words here, Mr. Powell, first public flight, where everybody was invited along to see this new glider in flight. Because at the time there are other clubs around the state, you know, Fremantle Club and also, who wanted to see this glider that he built. So there you are. So there we are, we have the story of the first glider. Now we move on here to this story here. This is the Penduly Gliding Club. Now, we contacted the Penduly Shire and contacted Denise Watts, who was the Shire councillor, said, we got a problem, we want to find out more about what happened in 1931 with your glider. As always, no photos existed. I thought, how extraordinary. You know, this is my trade and I deal in photos, and I couldn't believe it. No one had ever taken. This photo here was taken from a book called Penduly Progress, and they allowed us to use the information from the book in this photo. It's actually, when you reproduce a photo and you reproduce it again, it's actually called a rescreen. That's a technical name for it. Okay, the fella sitting on the seat there is Stan Sims, just as a matter of interest, it's not 1934, it should have been 1931. So, the other thing about this particular gliding club is that they knew that they were going to have this flight on this particular day. And they, one of the members was down in Albany, and he ran across, a lady actually, ran across this fella who was a movie cameraman for, I think it was something like Cine Sound, and said, hey, we're going to have a glider launch. Would you like to come and look? You know, oh yeah, I'll show up, you know. Well, for starters, just to have a movie film would have been great. Now, I find it difficult to this day, having done animation and that sort of stuff, that someone could process film on the move in those days. But Brian assures me that it could be done. Probably process the emulsion out of it, we discussed it the other day. So anyway, this fella took a couple of 100 feet of film of the glider, and it was shown that night at the town hall. Now, the thing about it is, we have searched and we've contacted everybody, the Prime Minister. No one knows where that film is. We've even contacted Cine Sound, it's all gone, so we lost the lot. So that's the story on Pinjar. Now, we move on to the next one. Edward Moore and Lewis Taylor. Now, when we started the book, we knew that we were going to have trouble with this particular story because it was in the too hard basket. I thought no one had ever even got a photograph of Ted Moore and Lewis Taylor, let alone know the whole story. So we finally one day I thought, well, I'm going to face this, I have to do it. So I was looking through a book that was published by David Crabb, and he's a fellow that builds, actually works on jumbo jet ailerons and things like that, a very cluey man. And he's written a book on Australian gliding full stop in the early days. And I sent him a letter and I said, look, right at the back of the book, in very fine type, you've got a word, a couple of words, it's got F. Bell. You know, you've written a letter to F. Bell about Bunbury. I said, yeah. I said, can I have some more information? Do you reckon you could give us their address? He said, oh, I'll try. He said, I haven't had contact with these people for 10 years. He said, they might not be there. So anyway, sure enough, I went to the phone book, phoned up these people. Lo and behold, Frank Bell answers the phone. Couldn't believe it. Turns out he was my school teacher from my primary school days. Can't get away from him. My son's a school teacher, my daughter-in-law's a school teacher. Anyway, so he was extremely helpful. He said, I'm writing a book too on hot air balloons and all this sort of stuff. I said, how do you know so much about this Bunbury thing? He said, they're my next door neighbours. What? So He said, just a minute. He said, ring me back in about half an hour. He said, I'll get you the information. So I said, oh yeah, he said, they've got a whole album full of stuff there, photos and stuff. He said, it's a gold mine, you know, for you, and a few stories that they can tell you. And he said, of course, he's passed away now. And I said, okay. So Pegmore invited us around, and Ralph, the son, and we had tea and Vicky's there, and it was all very enjoyable. And we looked through albums of photos, and we selected out of about 50, maybe, I don't know how many photos were there. Brilliant photos. This fellow was actually a photographer. So it helped us a great deal, having someone that really knew how to use a camera. So they said, yes, sure, you can use the photos of the book. Just make sure that they're copyright and they belong to Pegmore. So that's okay. While we were there, we found a lot more about other gliding clubs and things that they were associated with. And this particular shot here is, that is actually Ted Moore in 1936. And you can see he's sitting on the glider. As Brian described earlier, it's like sitting on a flying gate. And he is actually, well, that's at Northam. They used to go up to Northam in Easter and fly the gliders up there. So anyway, that's a story on Moore and Taylor at Bunbury. There's a lot more to the story, but I've narrowed it down for you today. Okay, so we move on here. We're getting back to the Fremantle Gliding Club. Okay, so this has always been a bit of a problem. We've never really been able to work this out, have we, Mr. Powell? So the fellow, all we had to go on once again was a name, J.C. Marsh, and there was a gliding club at Fremantle. And not a lot, but once again, Gloria went in the Batty Library, searched newspapers, I'm in your way, am I right? And found information. And in this case, this particular photo came from the Moore family. And the glider they built at Fremantle, or were building, was this particular glider here. And the story was that J.C. Marsh started, he was actually quite an experienced glider pilot. He came out here from England and he said to them, look, I'm going to design a glider, you'll build it my way. And they all had a big fight, and they actually kicked him out the gliding club. Okay? So they went off, took the glider, and they finished their glider off, and it's called the PG2. PG2 stands for Perth Glider 2. Okay? Now, that is not designed by an aeronautical engineer. So when I spoke to one of the fellas that actually flew it, Bob Grantham, he rang me a few days ago. Bob's 92 now. And he told me how much he enjoyed our book. And he said, oh, PG2, he said, I really hated that glider. He said it was like flying a lump of wood. It was terrible. He said it had no response to controls at all. He said it should have been burnt. I've heard that a few times. So there. So that's the PG2. So that's the what was left. Now the PG2 was pranged a lot of times. Okay, within City Beach and everything else. And as Bob Grantham actually told me, he said it should have been called the PG20 because that's how many times it was pranged and rebuilt. Now we're getting on here to the next story. When J.C. Marsh left the Fremantle Club, about a year later, a couple of years later, he designed this biplane glider. Now that's extraordinary. And according to every piece of history that I've read, okay, everybody says it never existed. That never existed. Notice the floats. Okay, now the fellow that I've been talking to that rang me the other day said the floats were actually timber frame and covered with canvas. Now we don't know how well it flew. We knew they tried to fly it at South Beach. We know that. Okay, and here we are. This photo is the glider in the water at South Beach. This never happened, according to some people. And it was only luck, again, that the librarians at the Fremantle Library found this. And I said, look, I'm looking for a picture of gliders. And I waited about a week, and finally this lady got back to me and she said, I don't know about gliders, no reflection on librarians, by the way. she said, just lack of knowledge of aeroplanes here. She said, I've got a picture here of an aeroplane in the water and it doesn't have a motor, but it's got two wings. And I thought, well, okay, I would buy that. That is confusing. But there it is, you can't argue with that. So that's why it's a double-page spread in the book. It's a fabulous picture, and it's also been taken commercially. And there you can see, if you look very carefully there, I'll just put that red, see there? You can see the tow line. That's J.C. Marsh sitting there on the glider. So there you are, that's the Fremantle Gliding Club and Seaplane Glider. We're going to the West Australian Flying Club at City Beach. Okay, so we're talking here about 1931. And once again, the Can We Help notice in the paper led us to Bob Grantham. As I said, he was only a teenager in these days. He was only a kid. Said 92 today, last week. Had some birthday cake with him. And he supplied us with all this information, these photos and that sort, and these stories. Now, Bob is a technical man. He's very accurate with his information, and he's still on my case about one mistake I made in the book. So, actually, it wasn't my mistake at all, someone else's. We're going to fight about that for years to come, I can see that. So yeah, that's actually, that fellow there, that's Bob Grantham, the guy in the black shorts. And that is the West Australian Flying Club members, and behind them, the white shed you can see, that's their kitchen. And inside the kitchen, I had a remember the old metal stove? And the metal stove, they actually bored a well in the ground, and it surprised me that you could get a well so close to the beach and get fresh water. But apparently they did. And they actually built their glider in here, in this shed. And I was taken down there while we were doing the book. Gloria and I went down there, and to this day, it's all fenced off. Actually, it's got a machine gun post sitting on top of the hill where they were. So that's the, and this, of course, here is Bob Grantham on his first flight in a glider. And you can see there, you can see at the back there, you see someone's holding the tail, and there's the bungee rope there, and a classic shot of a primary glider at City Beach. Rightio, now we're going to move on here. I might point out this here, that the government paid each gliding club £5 a quarter for a primary glider like that. And if you had the glider, if the glider was a secondary glider like that one, they paid you £7 10 shillings a quarter. And if you had a sailplane, they pay you £10. So what they did is they took a primary glider and they covered it in so they get more money. That's the reason that that was done. Bob told me he did it himself. So there you are. So that's the Fremantle. And they obviously moved from City Beach and they moved to the West Subi aerodrome a little bit later on. Now, as we move on here, this is a fascinating story. While we were going through the research for the book, this story came out of nowhere. We were looking at hundreds of photos and we noticed, actually someone pointed it out to me, what's that funny looking thing sitting on top of the wing? 1934. It's a motor. Someone had actually put a motor on, and later on, after this, we found, Gloria was searching, and we found that Gil Ford, who you saw earlier, built the first glider, was actually instrumental in putting the motor on the top of gliders. He patented the idea. So whether Gil Ford actually did that or not, I don't know. But the other fascinating thing about this picture, see this fellow here, when I started my apprenticeship in publishing, he was one of my tradesmen. That's Albert Ammon. To me, it means a lot. And this is the same glider with the motor running, for crying out loud. Okay? And you can see, they got here, if you look very carefully here, you can see the rubber rope. They're getting ready to catapult the thing into the air with the motor running, hoping they'll probably stay up for a minute or two. Early days of gliding. Okay, where are we? Okay, we're moving on here to the Spirit of Geraldton. Now, this is another story that we never knew existed. The people at Geraldton had heard about the accomplishments of the gliding in Perth and Fremantle and at Bunbury, and they were keen to get started with their own gliding club. So they bought a glider from Arthur Farmer. It was a single seat glider. And Arthur sold it to him because he wanted the money to build a Grano Baby, which he later on did the first Silver Sea in, Dennis. Okay? So this picture here is the opening ceremony of the gliding club. Now, this was taken in Rudd's Gully in Geraldton, Granite Road. And if you look very carefully here at this picture, oh, it's a fabulous picture, this. If you look very carefully there, you can see the old trailer. And have a go at this. If you look, see the lady here with holding a hat on? Very windy day. And when we searched through the archives and newspapers, it said the opening, well, it's notorious for windy days up there, isn't it? I mean, the trees are like sideways. Well, there you are. So that's Rudd's Gully. And the next picture here, of course, is Arthur Farmer test flying their glider that they just bought. Here it is here. And that's Arthur Farmer there. If you look very carefully at the side of the glider here, you'll see Spirit of Geraldton. And he flew it to about 800 feet. And did a circuit, and they took delivery of it. Now, I don't know how long the gliding club lasts, but we're talking here about, I think it's 1939. So the war was moving along. So we know that these things were shelved. We don't know where they went, but we know that they were shelved. Okay, so that's the Spirit of Geraldton. Now, when the gliding club at City Beach were offered the West Subi aerodrome, Indoshagans aerodrome, they jumped at it. They said, "You beaut, we can launch by car. We've never done that before, and we're going to get longer flights. We get a minute instead of 15 seconds." So here are, you can see here the Ron Ranger glider, the Austin 7 car, and on the end there, that's Guildford. Okay, and all the kids eager to get their glider. I think this picture's in the museum. So that's one of the, now what actually happened here, I'll just go on down the track a bit here. When I spoke to the fellow who was actually giving us a story on this book, and I said to him, you know, this business, how do they launch it? He said, well, they actually tied the winch to a tree, the pulley to a tree, and they ran the rope through it. And he said, we used to have someone standing next to it with an axe. No, this is for real. True story. And of course, I had a friend, well, actually my wife drew this up. And she's a very good artist, and we actually showed this to him. He said, is that right? He said, well, not quite, da-da-da. So we changed a bit, and there you are. So it's not to scale, but you can see the concept. It's a true story. Okay? The Fiat car, there you can see it round there like that, and there's your glider, and there's your Ron Ranger. So, now I'll just go a bit further down the track here. Am I going backwards here or not? Yes. Here's an interesting story. This is the Wetsugi airfield, and they built, the Wetsugi Flying Club built their first sailplane. And it was, they took it out to Northam, to a farm called Eagle Line. And they decided to name it after the farm. So they called it the Eagle Line Eagle. Now, it was test flown by Guildford. Now, when Gil flew it, he, for some reason or another, he had some bricks stowed behind him. Whether it was because of C and G balance, I don't know. But when he tried to land it, one of the bricks came out and landed behind the rudder pedal. And he couldn't keep the thing straight, so he ground looped it. His first flight. So anyway, they decided after a few more flights that they have to change it because they weren't happy with the moment of the aeroplane, the length of the fuselage and stuff. And you have to remember, this didn't come from plans. They designed this themselves. So they lengthened this part here, probably to give it a bit more stability, Dennis. Anyway, they rebuilt the whole aeroplane and they changed the name, and it was built by Jack Dalton. Now, Jack Dalton learnt to fly at the Fremantle Gliding Club when they had a stick and rudder on the floor of the lounge room and they're charging $1 a week to learn how to fly. And he built this aeroplane, he rebuilt it. So there you are, you think it doesn't cost much to fly in a lounge room floor, does it? Interesting story behind this photo, and that is the, if you look very carefully at it, you'll see the white marks through it. They used to fly the gliders from here and launch them across here towards the westerly breeze. But what they did was they ploughed the field towards the beginning of the war so the enemy couldn't land it. And they did the same thing with Lake Pinjar. They ploughed the field. And that is the reason that the gliding clubs had to go to Caversham. They ploughed the place. And here we have the same field. What year was this, Brian? 1930 or something?
Yeah, the mid to late 30s.
Yes. So there you see the racetrack. And Indershagen was trying to make money out of it, so he hired the place out as a racetrack. And to this day, that racetrack is still there. Bits of it are still there. And there it is today. That's where it would be today. This is pretty much getting towards the end of it now. So we've got here the Pinjar Soaring Club, 1937, 1942. Pretty much started by Rick New, Jim Bramazin and Lee Sargent. They were builders working on a building site, and they decided that they were going to get into this gliding thing. So what they did was I think it was more to do with Rick New than anything else, because you know he was associated with the Midland Brick Company. And from the time they decided to actually build a glider to when it was finished was 4 months. Sounds a little bit like Rick New. But anyway, that's Rick sitting on his glider, Ron Ranger. Now it was a time, they called it a time of teach yourself gliding, or teach yourself to fly. So they didn't have an instructor sitting next to them, as I said to Brian the other day, in a nice cosy little aeroplane showing you how to fly. They had to sit out there and teach yourself how to keep the wings level and keep it straight. And as Len Anderson, where's Len? He's here somewhere, said to me the other day that they lost so many members at Caversham out of fear. Because once they got up to probably 20 or 30 feet, or like 10 stories up or whatever it was, or even more, they gave it away. This was the Pinjar Soaring Club, and once again, 1941, and this is, as Brian said, it had written all over it. It's pretty rough conditions. But what Rick knew is, because he happened to own the Midland Brick Company, he paved the floor with bricks, paving bricks. Now, aren't we all doing that today? And down the side here, he had sliding doors in the place, for heaven's sake. Pretty advanced for those years. There. So we move on to this one here. This I'll just go back to that one there, I think. Oh, hang on. The members of the, just quickly on this, these are the members of the Lake Pinjar Club. This fellow man here, Neville Wynne, he did a lot of work for the Gliding Club of Western Australia, and that is the Kestrel sailplane, and to this day it's still in a hangar at Tunderby. Hopefully it finds itself in a nice museum one day. It was owned by Rick New. So we get on to this shot here. Famous photo. Very famous photo. Rick New actually, as you can see, he took it for the newspaper, and he took it from 800 feet. Now look at the view, and you say to yourself, I wonder how many people would fly today on their first solo, looking down like that. You've got to think about this for a while. We'd lose a lot of students, I would think. Yes, exactly. You have to think about that, don't you? Okay, just quickly, this is Jim de Boulay, won't hold you up long. This is Jim de Boulay, a young lad carting sheep and wool to the Geraldton wool store. Spotted a glider sitting on a rack one day as a kid, saved up his pocket money and took it home. And you can see it's pretty rugged. And I rang him up and I said, you know, what was it like? He said I was all, you know, the salt air had got to it, rusted it, but he said he covered it. And I said, how many flights did you do? He said, 12. I said, what happened? He said, I tied it down the paddocks and a willy came along and blew it over. Geez, I've heard that story before. So anyway, a few years later, he built another glider and nearly killed himself. So this is the last section here. Now we're getting into Caversham, and this is one of my favourite pictures actually. I like the way the person here is the action of the person releasing the wing. And this glider was actually a single seater and they converted it to a two-seater. Finance, that's, you know. But in the front seat there's only one person there, test flight, and they put a sandbag next to the person to take the place of a passenger. So the joke was, they named the sandbag Arthur Sandbag. Right? Got a sense of humour this one. So someone said to me, why is that fellow dressed in white with the two buttons? And I said, well, if you were 1,000 feet away in a car, you reckon you could see someone? So they dressed him in white with big buttons. There you are. And this particular shot here, now they've got two people in there. The fellow on this side was a Daily News reporter. Oh. Here, 1946. Here we have expert tuition, we call it, and that's Ray Baird. That's actually Gloria's husband there, and that's Neville Wynn there, and I think that's also a commercial shot, nice and sharp and clean. Here we have the 231B, which was brought out from England in kit form and built by Jeff Higginson in the front seat there. Mr. Powell. Yeah, he's laughing at me. Well, he wants to fight me over this. But that's Jeff Higginson, and he's a licensed aircraft maintenance engineer for MMR. And he built the thing from kit. And that's Arthur Farmer in the back seat. Yeah, you're going to fight me on this, I know that. So this is the first aerodrome in Western Australia. And the interesting thing about this particular photo is the length of the rope. Bruno Baby, that's Gloria's husband again, Ray Baird here. And it took them several years to get permission to do this. Red tape. Moving on here, this was, where's Len? He's here somewhere. Len's in the back seat. Len's in the back seat there. And there's Mr. Baird, my flying instructor. And you can see that it's quite an overcast dark day, and look at the raindrops on the glider here. I had a phone call from a fella, and he said, I want to buy one of your books. I said, oh, that's good, come on home. He lived locally, and he went away, and he came back about 2 weeks later. He said, you know that picture in there, that glider, the GLA? I said, yeah. He said, did you ever fly it? I said, well, actually, I did my third solo flight in that glider. Very heavy on the ailerons. He said, do you know the story on it? I said, no, I don't. He said, it was actually two gliders. They'd smashed. And he said, Snyder put them together, the better of the two, and sold them to the Gliding Club of Western Australia for £1,000. Nothing wrong with the glider. I mean, I flew it donkey's years, and I think it was sold to an aerodrome later on. Nothing wrong with it. Perfectly good glider. This is the classic shot, the newspaper shot. And this is the Ron Ranger glider in 1946. And I'm always interested in this picture because look very carefully there. Look at the down elevator here. And look at the way the stick is forward. I think it's an absolute classic shot. That is. And that's yours truly in the KO6. And Brian said to me, what would you like to say about the KO6? And I'd say, in my opinion, it was probably one of the nicest single-seaters ever built. For those of us that are flying aeroplanes, I think you could fly the KO6 in a rate 3 turn with shudder and shake and carry on and say, you shouldn't be flying me like this, but it was hard to spin. And that's why it's so damn good in weak conditions. And someone said to me, oh, you flew that from Penduly to Geraldton, you know, about me, the skill I had. I said, no, it wasn't me. I said, there were several things. It was a good day in the KO6. It had nothing to do with me at all. So there you are. And that was responsible, actually, for the fact that we wrote a book called On Silent Wings. Because what I did in this glider caused the president of the gliding club to phone me and say, what did you do? Do you remember? And that's the glider. Sadly, it was smashed to pieces. I'll just tell you quickly about one of my Bingals. If you look very carefully there, They put an aluminium strip on the nose, Dennis, okay? And that was there because I landed it too fast and scratched the nose.
I had the same trouble.
Did you? No, yeah, not perfect, pal. Okay, so that's the end of my little talk. Thank you very much for having us, Gloria and I. And that's the book. And I've pretty much done all the publication work myself, so it's done at cost. And if you smile at Gloria, she'll probably sell you one for $20. It's cost, okay? And as I said, thank you very much for having us.